Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. By now, evening had fallen, and the moon hung high in the sky. Outside the bloodstream sect, that moon appeared as white as ever, but looking at it from inside the sect, it was crimson. Blood-colored light bathed the sect, making it look even more grim and sinister than before. Disciples from other sects would shake in fear at such a sight, but Bai Xiaochun had been in the bloodstream sect for long enough that he'd grown used to it. He was currently walking along a moonlit mountain path. Everything around him lay in waste. The ground and trees were destroyed, the immortals' caves collapsed. However, it was very quiet. News about Bai Xiaochun's battle during the day on Middle Peak had already begun to spread like wildfire through the rest of the sect. In the bloodstream sect, the law of the jungle prevailed, and people only showed respect to the powerful. During that spectacular fight, Bai Xiaochun had showed a brutal strength, a madness, a bloodthirstiness that struck everyone deep into their hearts. He alone had stood up to dozens of Foundation establishment cultivators, and had even killed 7 or 8 of them. It was a rare thing even in the bloodstream sect, and to many people, Bai Xiaochun had already become the stuff of nightmares. Not a single person suspected that he wasn't a bloodstream sect disciple, and if anyone had dared to make such an accusation, no one would have believed them. I really don't like fighting and killing, Bai Xiaochun thought, sighing. After returning to his immortals cave and finding that it had been completely destroyed, he sat down off to the side and decided that tomorrow, he would go pick a new immortals cave. The night passed uneventfully. However, the cultivators of Middle Peak sat in the darkness, hearts pounding with fear. The events during the day were truly like a nightmare, and all of them feared that Bai Xiaochun would come for retribution. They sat restlessly in their immortals caves, spell formations active. There were even some who fled Middle Peak altogether. Of course, word rapidly spread about the madness on Middle Peak, and Bai Xiaochun's violent outburst. Some of the Foundation establishment cultivators on Lesser Marsh Peak, Nameless Peak, and Corpse Peak had personally witnessed the event, whereas others only heard about it after the fact. All of them were shocked. He personally fought back against dozens of Foundation establishment cultivators. He actually defied the orders of a patriarch. Everyone just stood by and watched while he killed 8 people. The survivors were forced to hide together behind a spell formation. Word spread like mad through the 4 mountain peaks of the bloodstream sect. Even the inner sect disciples on the back of the hand soon caught wind of Bai Xiaochun's actions. All of them were astonished. People had already come to view him as a bloodthirsty fiend, and now, the inner sect disciples could only imagine a variety of terrifying images regarding what had occurred. Night Crypt is incredible. He ripped people apart, then drank their blood as he killed the other bystanders. I heard he's not even a cultivator. He's actually an evil, green-skinned hobgoblin in disguise. He has superhuman strength. A single bump from him can shake an entire mountain. All sorts of rumors began to spread. It only took a single night before countless people in the bloodstream sect learned about a new person that nobody could provoke, a person named Night Crypt. At dawn, Bai Xiaochun opened his eyes and went to take a walk. By that time, word about him had spread throughout the sect. Even the outer sect disciples had heard the stories. In fact, the disciples used various methods to spread the word, and it wasn't long before the cultivator clans in the area had heard the tales. It was easy to imagine how quickly the other major sects would learn of Night Crypt's name. It went without saying that the news spread faster in the bloodstream sect than it would have in the spirit stream sect. After all, the bloodstream sect disciples always walked around on edge to begin with, and never had much entertainment. Coupled with the fervor they felt toward powerful experts, it ensured that they were always very interested in newly risen chosen. Bai Xiaochun almost immediately came to experience that himself. Whenever Foundation establishment cultivators saw him coming, their expressions would flicker. Those who hadn't participated in the fighting the day before would smile broadly and clasp hands in greeting. Bai Xiaochun was moved. Now that he had proven himself, he finally got the same feeling he did when he walked around in the spirit stream sect. His initial reaction was to smile and nod back to them in greeting. However, in response to his smile, the other Foundation establishment cultivators' eyes would go wide with disbelief. Many of them would even subconsciously take a few steps back, hesitant expressions on their faces. At first, Bai Xiaochun was shocked. But then he put on a cold demeanor and stared icily at them, and the Foundation establishment cultivators would sigh in relief. To them, that expression seemed much more befitting of Night Crypt. I'm such a good person, Bai Xiaochun thought to himself, sighing inwardly. Having no other option, he maintained a cold, indifferent expression, glaring here and there. That earned him much more respect. As he walked along, his eyes started to get tired from all the glaring. Eventually, he reached the pavilion where he could select a new immortal's cave. The old man who had previously treated him with cool indifference suddenly rushed out and offered greetings. When he realized that Bai Xiaochun had come to choose an immortal's cave, he was at first shocked, but then quickly changed his attitude. Eyes burning with passion, he produced a scroll map and opened it to show Bai Xiaochun. Junior brother Night Crypt, what do you think about this one? This immortal's cave has wonderful surroundings, and the blood chi there is incredible. Or what about this one? A prime elder once lived there. I usually don't point that out to anyone. There's also this place? If I remember, there are a few puppets that come with that one. Although Bai Xiaochun was moved by the old man's passionate introduction to the immortal's cave, his face remained icy and ruthless. Eventually, he frowned. Although the open immortal's caves were better than his old destroyed one, they still weren't as good as the ones with a lot of blood chi. Seeing Bai Xiaochun frowning, the old man seemed like he wanted to say something, then hesitated. He looked at Bai Xiaochun for another moment, then thought about the fight from the day before. Finally, he gritted his teeth and lowered his voice. Junior brother Night Crypt, you don't need to come here to select an immortal's cave, huh? Bai Xiaochun blinked thoughtfully. Deciding to make things more clear, the old man lowered his voice further. Remember, in the Bloodstream sect, we respect the strong and powerful. Many people don't officially select immortals' caves, they just take them. If you see one you like, kick the old owner out, and it becomes yours. Bai Xiaochun's eyes began to shine brightly. The truth was that he had lived for so long in the Spirit Stream sect that, deep inside, he wasn't at all like the Bloodstream sect people. Sometimes it was hard to think the way they did. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed the old man to remind him. Clearing his throat, he maintained his icy exterior, and nodded coolly to the old man. Then he swished his sleeve and turned to leave. Inside, he was filled with the excitement that came from being able to violate a taboo. The old man watched Bai Xiaochun leaving, and sighed. As far as he was concerned, it was a big pity that Night Crypt was only in Mortal Dao Foundation establishment. Otherwise, he might have had an extraordinary future. Of course, even though he was merely in Mortal Dao Foundation establishment, he was still a brutal fiend who couldn't be provoked. Bai Xiaochun walked along, feeling more and more excited, his heart pounding as he looked around. What a feeling. I can just take whatever I like? Nothing matters except that I'm stronger, so I can have whatever I want. He licked his lips in anticipation. This was something that could never happen in the Spirit Stream sect. It was like finally being able to eat forbidden fruit. He scoured Middle Peak for half a day, and around noontime identified an immortal's cave he liked. It was rather large, and the grounds around it were covered with blood trees. It was almost like a whole world unto itself. The blood trees all had faces on them, and although their eyes were closed, they seemed completely sinister and bizarre, the type that would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who got near them. In fact, the only path leading to the door had been overrun by the sinister blood trees. Even from a distance, it was possible to see the faint blood mist that filled the area. Just barely visible through the blood trees was a blood cistern with dense blood chi. The area was paved with limestone, and there were some refined corpses wearing suits of armor who stood guard. Next to the cistern was the entrance to the Immortal's Cave, a huge white door that was carved with intricate spell formations. The spell formations were currently active, flickering with bright light that ensured that the entire area was shielded. Looking at the scene, Bai Xiaochun licked his lips, and his eyes began to shine. What a great location. He had secretly absorbed blood chi from this location in the past, and vaguely remembered that it was Master God Diviner's Immortal's Cave. He had asked Imposter Night Crypt, and learned that Master God Diviner was only in the early Foundation establishment stage, but as he was very adept at divination and augury, he was very important to the sect. In the Lone Hell Pocket Realm, he had reached Earthstring Foundation establishment, but had only achieved a few tide flows. Even still, it was enough to set him on the path to fame in the Bloodstream sect. Therefore, it was no surprise that he had occupied such a nice Immortal's Cave for such a long time. Eyes shining, Bai Xiaochun sped forward toward the Immortal's Cave. As he neared, faces on the blood trees opened their eyes, which shone with killing intent. However, as soon as they recognized Bai Xiaochun, they began to scream in high-pitched voices. Night Devil is here. It's Night Devil. Heavens. Night Devil is here for revenge. Master, save me. Inside the Immortal's Cave, Master God Diviner gritted his teeth. He both hated and feared Bai Xiaochun, and when he thought about the brutal events from the previous day, he was sure that Bai Xiaochun had come to get revenge. Then he heard the voices crying out from the outside, and his eyes went wide. Sure enough, he's here, Night Devil? When Bai Xiaochun heard what the blood trees were screaming, his jaw dropped. He had no way of knowing, but because of the brutality of the previous day's events, quite a few people had taken to calling him Night Devil. Annoyed by the shrieking trees, he snorted coldly and said, "Shut up." His voice was accompanied by a brutally murderous air that scared the blood trees so much that they started trembling and lapsed into silence. Terrified, the trees that had planted themselves onto the path leading to the Immortals' cave pulled up their roots and cleared the way. Bai Xiaochun clasped his hands behind his back, stuck his chin up, and coolly said, "Master God Diviner, get out here." Everyone who heard him was completely shocked. Inside the Immortals' cave, Master God Diviner's face went ashen, and a crazed look appeared in his eyes. Gritting his teeth, sweat popping out on his forehead, he cried, "Night Crypt, don't push things too far." Bai Xiaochun didn't step into the forest of blood trees. The pressure from the spell formation was too threatening. However, in response to Master God Diviner's words, he smiled grimly and then unleashed some blood chi. In the blink of an eye, all of the blood chi in the area began to churn, transforming into a dense mist. The faces on the blood trees began to quiver, but they didn't dare to scream. They simply began to huddle together in shock. The Foundation establishment cultivators in the area could sense what was happening, and saw the shocking blood chi building up around Bai Xiaochun. Inside the Immortals' cave, Master God Diviner sat there with ashen face, chuckling bitterly. The madness in his eyes grew, and just when he was about to jump out and fight to the death, Bai Xiaochun's cruel voice once again filled the area. "I'll give you 3 breaths of time to get the hell out of there," he said proudly. "I want this Immortals' cave." With that he flicked his sleeve. Master God Diviner had been ready to unleash the power of the spell formation to fight to the death with Bai Xiaochun. But when he heard his words, his eyes went wide with surprise. He almost couldn't believe it. "You think I'll risk my life based on your kindness, Night Crypt? What makes you think I'll believe you?" Sticking his chin up, Bai Xiaochun replied, "Calm down. I'm a man of my word. If I say I'm going to take your Immortals' cave, then I'm going to take your Immortals' cave." Even as the words left his mouth, the door to the Immortals' cave opened, and Master God Diviner flew out at top speed, flying off into the air. As he did, his voice echoed out, "Night Crypt, the Bloodstream sect is a devilish sect, but we keep our promises. If you go back on your word in front of all these fellow Taoists, you'll be hated by everyone. No one will ever believe you again." Master God Diviner was truly afraid. He feared that Bai Xiaochun was intentionally drawing him out of his Immortals' cave to attack him. Even as he flew off, he tossed down the jade pendant to the Immortals' cave. Never could he have imagined that Bai Xiaochun really had just come for the Immortals' cave, and not his life. In fact, he still couldn't believe it, and his heart pounded with the feeling of having nearly escaped a deadly catastrophe. As he caught the jade pendant, Bai Xiaochun stared at the fleeing Master God Diviner. Only then did he understand what was going on. Sighing, he ignored Master God Diviner and then stepped into the blood tree forest. As soon as the blood trees realized they had a new master, they were all smiles, and even began to lavish him with praise. Master Night Devil is mighty and extraordinary, invincible under the heavens. Master Night Devil is a master strategist. He can succeed with even the most difficult tasks. Bai Xiaochun looked at the fawning blood trees with a somber, cold expression, and yet, a gleam of encouragement could be seen in his eyes. At first, the blood trees had been very nervous, but when they saw the encouraging look, they mustered their courage and heaped more flattery upon him. Bai Xiaochun sighed and shook his head. "I really am quite outstanding," he murmured. "No matter where I go, people are always trying to flatter me. It's annoying, and yet, I can't really stop them either." His size caused the blood trees' flattery to increase. Compared to Night Devil, no other devils exist in the world. With a single glance, Night Devil causes all the female cultivators to swoon. When Night Devil sighs, the heavens turn dim. As the blood trees went all out with their praise, Bai Xiaochun happily stepped into Master God Diviner's Immortals' cave. The blood chi here didn't seem any less strong than that near Song Qiu's blood waterfall. Bai Xiaochun felt even more satisfied than before. There were 7 or 8 puppets present which all offered formal greetings. He quickly sent them over to his old collapsed Immortals' cave to bring his belongings over. Soon, the fact that Bai Xiaochun had occupied Master God Diviner's Immortals' cave spread through all of Middle Peak. Yet again, a whole new set of stories regarding Night Crypt's brutality were told. Half a month went by, during which time the stories of Night Crypt grew more and more wild. All of the cultivator clans in the area already knew about him. Soon, everyone was aware that a new, savage figure had appeared in the Bloodstream sect. He had single-handedly fought an entire group of Foundation establishment experts, and even killed 7 or 8 of them. He had drawn upon all the blood chi of Middle Peak to form an enormous, shocking blood sword. And then there was his inverse blood ancestral awakening, which left everyone completely astonished. He has a strange personality and is completely unpredictable. One second he'll be slaughtering people left and right, the next, he's calm and lets everyone off the hook. It's impossible to figure him out. I heard that, according to Patriarch Limitless, it was Nightcrypt's devilish personality that enabled him to escape alive from the spirit stream sect's Bai Xiaochun. Nightcrypt has obviously been extraordinary for some time. Not even Song K is a match for him. It's too bad he's only at Mortal Dao Foundation establishment. Otherwise, he'd be even stronger than he is now. That's nothing. I heard that the Grand Elders of all 4 mountain peaks fought over him. In the end, he chose Grand Elder Song Junwan of Middle Peak. What a pity. Of course, news leaked from Bloodstream sect territory into the territory of other sects. Eventually, even the warring Profound Stream sect and Pillstream sect had heard of Nightcrypt. The Spirit Stream sect was closer than they were to the Bloodstream sect, so they were privy to more details. Eventually, both the north and south banks of the Spirit Stream sect were abuzz with the topic. Ghostfang was in secluded meditation, but even he heard some of the stories. Frowning, he thought back to the fallen Sword Abyss, but couldn't recall a Bloodstream sect disciple with that name. Nightcrypt? I don't remember him. Shangguan Tianyu was also in secluded meditation. After thinking the matter over, he couldn't recall any information about the person in question. But that didn't matter. He wasn't happy about anyone being stronger than him. When it came to the chosen of any generation, they knew that the only way to maintain their place was to keep getting stronger and stronger. Nightcrypt. Zhou Xinqi took a deep breath. The Spirit Stream sect paid very close attention to the affairs of the Bloodstream sect. Zhou Xinqi was very shocked by the news, especially when she heard that he had fought a battle with an entire group of Foundation establishment experts. Gritting her teeth, she focused even harder on her cultivation. It was the same with Beihan Lai, Lu Tinlei, Xu Song, Gongsun Yun and many other chosen. The stories about Nightcrypt spurred them into even greater focus. As for the sect leader and the other high-level leaders, they also took note, but what interested them more was the inverse blood ancestral awakening. If this Nightcrypt keeps getting stronger, he could turn into quite the calamity. Put more resources into the search for Bai Xiaochun. Ever since the kid left, not even a shadow of him has turned up. Even the people we sent to watch over him haven't been able to turn up any clues. The Spirit Stream sect chosen and leadership figures were shaken. As for the ordinary inner sect disciples, most of them weren't very impressed with the stories they heard. What the hell is a Nightcrypt? Can he even come close to Sect Uncle Bai? Yeah, exactly. If Sect Uncle Bai fought him, this Nightcrypt would be turned to ash in a second. That was what many people were saying, especially Hu Xiaomei and Big Fatty Zhang. Xu Baosai was especially fervent in his opinions as well. In fact, to confirm her theory that the newly famous Nightcrypt would be completely destroyed by the simple wave of Bai Xiaochun's finger, Hu Xiaomei went to consult with Hu Yunfei, who was in secluded meditation. After a long moment of thought, Hu Yunfei smiled and said, Nightcrypt? There were too many people attacking Xiaochun at the same time. I don't really remember them all. I knew that guy was a nobody. Big bro Xiaochun is the awesomest. At first, Hu Xiaomei was very happy. However, her mood quickly soured. Where do you think Xiaochun is now anyway? How come nobody can find him? I hope he's not in trouble. Hu Yunfei tousled her hair and looked off into the distance. Don't worry about him, he said with a slight smile. No matter where he ends up, the people who'll end up in trouble are the unlucky folks around him. Who knows how many folks he's driven crazy so far? Hu Xiaomei thought back to all of the past events Bai Xiaochun had been involved with, and smiled. Finally, she took a deep breath. Eyes filled with determination and cheeks flushed, she decided that she had to work hard at her cultivation. Without doing that, there wasn't any hope at all of anything happening between her and Bai Xiaochun. As stories of Nightcrypt spread, Bai Xiaochun was sitting by the blood cistern, working on his cultivation. With the help of the strong blood qi in the area, he was already working on the second level of the Undying Heavenly King. By now, more than half of the Heavenspan river water had merged into his first spiritual sea. Before long, the process would be complete. That would signify that he had begun to break through from early Foundation establishment. It would also represent another step of progress with his human-controlling grand magic. At that point, he would be able to experiment in ways that he had only been able to dream about before. Although he hadn't come across an opportunity to use his Heavenspan Dharma Eye, he was confident that when he opened it, it would be even more powerful than before. Then there was his mountain-shaking bash. He continued to practice with it, which caused booming sounds to echo around his immortals cave as he grew more and more familiar with it. He didn't give up on his work with protomagnetic power either. Although he hadn't mastered it, he was convinced that it was an extraordinary magic, and his heart thumped with anticipation at being able to use the powers of gravity and repulsion. If I could completely come to understand it, then if someone stronger than me was chasing me, I could just wave my finger, and they wouldn't be able to get close. As for anyone weaker than me, I could just wave my hand, and they would fly toward me. When he thought about that, his eyes glittered like diamonds. Being able to force people to come and go as I wish. Now that is a level unto itself. The more Bai Xiaochun thought about it, the more he looked forward to it. He could almost imagine what it would be like when he mastered protomagnetic power, and could reduce things to ash with the wave of his hand. The swish of a sleeve could send enemies far off into the distance, and simultaneously bring friends close by to protect them. It was such an entrancing idea that Bai Xiaochun looked at his sleeve for a moment, and then decided to perform some more tests. He worked hard for more than half a month. One night, in the middle of his protomagnetic power research, a blood-colored palanquin trundled along toward the sect, carried on the shoulders of 8 gargoyles. On either side of the palanquin were hosts of palace maids carrying blood-colored lanterns that caused blood-colored light to spill out in all directions. Inside the palanquin was Shui Mei, wearing her mask, staring grimly at a jade slip she held in her hand. She had left the sect a few months ago on a mission. After killing some profound stream sect spies in one of the local cultivator clans, she was now on her way back to the sect. Night Crypt. Looking over at the sect, her eyes flickered with killing intent. About a month ago, when she was still in the middle of her mission, she had heard some of the other disciples talking about Night Crypt. She knew about the chaos on Middle Peak, and also knew that her immortals' cave had been destroyed. Now, more killing intent roiled in her eyes than before. In the past, she hadn't thought much about Night Crypt. To her, he was like an ant, someone who could be killed at the drop of a hat. If it weren't for the fact that she had been out on a mission, she would have arranged to have him exterminated. Even the fact that he had been hiding on Corpse Peak wouldn't have mattered. Of course, she wouldn't have done the deed herself. But then Night Crypt had the gall to actually destroy her immortal's cave. After that came the news that he had fought with a whole group of Foundation establishment cultivators, and had even drawn upon the blood chi of all of Middle Peak for his inverse blood ancestral awakening. It was truly a spectacular accomplishment. However, if Shui Mei wanted him killed, she could still do it. Waving her hand, she said, to Middle Peak. In response to her words, the palace maids and gargoyles changed direction. Instead of heading toward Ancestor Peak, they were now moving through the darkness of night toward Middle Peak. Her arrival caused pressure to spread out that many of the Foundation establishment cultivators could detect, whereupon they saw the blood palanquin. As for the cultivators who had teamed up to fight Bai Xiaochun, their eyes shone with delight. That was especially true of Master God Diviner. He was now living in a relatively simple and crude immortal's cave, and when he saw Shui Mei's palanquin flying through the air, he began to tremble with excitement. Let's see how you hide this time, Night Crypt. Everyone else is too scared to attack you. Even Patriarch Limitless approved of you. But young lady Shui Mei reached 9 tide flows, and she's Patriarch Limitless' beloved daughter. If she wants to kill you, not even the Patriarch would stop her. You're dead, Night Crypt. Although it was very quiet on Middle Peak, if you listened carefully, you would be able to hear numerous cultivators doing their best to stifle their breathing. It was like the calm before a storm. Soon the blood palanquin was hovering in the air above Shui Mei's immortal's cave. When Shui Mei saw the rubble down below, she began to breathe heavily. Transforming into a beam of blood-colored light, she shot down toward the immortal's cave. The wave of her sleeve sent countless rocks and bits of rubble flying away to reveal a destroyed spell formation, and the shattered remnants of her blood bottle. As she stared at her bottle, her murderous aura grew more and more intense, until it formed an explosive energy around her. Astonishingly, 9 vortexes could be seen surrounding her. Those were the manifestations of the 9 tide flows of her Earthstring Foundation establishment. They spun rapidly until they were like 9 enormous tornadoes, causing widespread shock among the cultivators in the area. A moment later, Shui Mei's voice echoed out, filled with boundless killing intent. Where is Night Crypt? Master God Diviner had been paying close attention to what was happening, and as soon as he heard her words, he burst out into the open and flew over. Clasping hands and bowing deeply, he excitedly said, Young lady Shui Mei, please take charge here. Night Crypt is matchlessly vicious, a thug who commits every imaginable misdeed. Not only did he destroy your immortal's cave, he killed many fellow members of the sect. Then he stole my immortal's cave. That's exactly where you can find him right now. I'll lead the way, young lady. Shui Mei looked at Master God Diviner, and her gaze caused his heart to pound. Averting his gaze, he quickly led her toward Bai Xiaochun. Quite a few other Foundation establishment cultivators were in the area secretly watching, and they began to follow along. Cruel looks could be seen in their eyes as they anticipated the scene of young lady Shui Mei slaughtering Bai Xiaochun. Night Crypt is dead. HMPH. Let's see him be arrogant and aggressive this time. He can bully us, but he'll be like a bug in front of young lady Shui Mei. Young lady Shui Mei reached 9 tide flows, shaking the entire eastern lower reaches of the cultivation world. Other than the legendary Bai Xiaochun, who could possibly be a match for her, they followed along excitedly until they were outside of Bai Xiaochun's new immortals cave. Young lady Shui Mei, Master God Diviner said through gritted teeth, the hoodlum is right here. After everything that had occurred, Master God Diviner hated Bai Xiaochun down to his very bones. Shui Mei looked at the immortals cave and the blood trees with the vicious faces. The blood trees opened their eyes, and immediately began to tremble. None of them dared to even speak. Apparently they could sense how much more terrifying young lady Shui Mei was than Night Crypt. Not only did they not say a word, they uprooted themselves and moved off to the side, revealing the blood cistern and the immortals cave. Shui Mei's killing intent slowly transformed into blood qi, which swirled around her as she began to stride forward. It only took a moment for her to be hovering directly above the immortals cave. There, she lifted her right hand, which turned blood red before she then shoved it downward. All of Middle Peak trembled in response, and the same spell formation appeared that had appeared when the Patriarch made a move not too many days before. Massive amounts of blood qi swirled together, converging beneath Shui Mei in the form of an enormous, blood-colored plum blossom. Then, the plum blossom began to drop down toward the immortals cave. The cave's spell formation was activated, and attempted to fight back, but the blood-colored plum blossom was too shockingly powerful. It had been converged from all of the blood qi in the area, and seemed capable of completely dominating the spell formation. The spell formation only managed to hold out for a few breaths worth of time before it faded away. Then Shui Mei's attack continued to descend. Incredible rumbling echoed out in all directions. The crowd looked on excitedly as Bai Xiaochun's immortals cave began to collapse, sending rocks and rubble tumbling in all directions. Young lady Shui is almighty, ha ha ha, Night Crypt, you're. Although everyone was cheering at first, they quickly discovered that, unexpectedly, the immortals cave was empty. Shui Mei snorted coldly, then waved her finger toward the blood cistern. Instantly, blood qi erupted out, slamming into the cistern, which collapsed with a boom. At the same time, someone shot out from inside the cistern, that person being Bai Xiaochun himself. He had been practicing cultivation happily at the bottom of the cistern when he suddenly heard the commotion up above. Before he could even take the time to check what was happening, the top of the cistern had been destroyed. He wasn't injured, but he was certainly shocked. He also wasn't sure what type of mysterious treasure she was using to create such an overpowering aura. That was the only explanation why he hadn't detected her earlier. Listen, we're all chosen, so please just listen to what Shui Mei looked over at him calmly. There were some people in life that she didn't view as insects, but Night Crypt wasn't one of those people. She waved her finger again, and Bai Xiaochun immediately felt a sensation of imminent crisis. It was the explosive power of 9 tide flows. She only waved her finger once, but it contained layer upon layer of power, all of which was bearing down on Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was angry. In his opinion, they were all chosen, so there was no reason they couldn't sit down and discuss things reasonably. Why did they have to instantly resort to deadly fighting? However, at the moment, he had no choice but to unleash his own blood qi. Raising his hand up over his head, he grabbed the blood sword that formed, and then slashed it out in front of him. A boom echoed out, shaking everything in the area. As the shockwave spread out, Bai Xiaochun's hair flew about wildly. For the first time, a brilliant light shone in Shui Mei's eyes, and she snorted coldly. Not bad after all, she said coolly. But external power is nothing more than external power. Blood qi seal. Her right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and then she pointed her finger out, and the same thing that had occurred when the Patriarch appeared happened again. All of the blood qi around Bai Xiaochun began to tremble and disperse. Bai Xiaochun looked around, and immediately realized that there were the signs of a spell formation in the ground. Although she couldn't control all of Middle Peak like Patriarch Limitless could, she could control a smaller area. As of this moment, she said placidly, you are nothing more than an ant. Then she began to speed toward Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's face fell. The blood qi in the area had been suppressed, but if he wanted to, he could seize control back, just like he had done before. Unfortunately, if he did that now, it would reveal some secrets that he didn't want other people to know about. A boom rang out as they slammed into each other. Bai Xiaochun staggered back, his rage growing. As for Shui Mei, intense killing intent could be seen in her eyes. She once again performed another incantation gesture, summoning a blood-colored plum blossom which shot toward Bai Xiaochun. A fierce look could be seen in Bai Xiaochun's eyes. Shui Mei was far stronger than Song Ke, and was in fact the most powerful enemy he had encountered since reaching Foundation establishment. Even as he was trying to decide how to deal with her, a flirtatious laugh suddenly echoed out in the area. What foul wind blew young lady Shui Mei over here? What's wrong? You don't like my junior brother Nightcrypt? Another casual laugh floated through the area as Middle Peak Grand Elder Song Junwan appeared in front of Bai Xiaochun. She was wearing a different outfit than before, but it was just as incapable of containing her voluptuous physique as the other, almost as if she had to breath out just to fit into it. Curves were visible everywhere, along with milky white skin. She was truly explosively sexy. As soon as the words left her mouth, the blood-colored plum blossom stopped in place in midair. Song Junwan's hair floated around her, and a fragrant aroma spread out. She was like a ripe peach that caused all of the other Foundation establishment cultivators to gasp with desire. Tongues sticking to the roofs of their mouths, they bowed their heads to avoid looking at the fatally attractive image in front of them. Only Bai Xiaochun dared to stare. Then, he spoke up, sounding wronged and bullied. Big sis Song, if you'd been even a bit later, I would have lost my poor little life. You're always looking at me like that, you lecherous little rascal, Song Junwan said with a flirtatious smile. What exactly do you think you're going to do? Although she didn't seem to technically be flirting, her spectacular beauty and sparkling eyes would stir the emotions of anyone who saw them. In his heart, Bai Xiaochun wanted to tell her that she was a vixen. However, if he didn't somehow manage to become Grand Elder himself, then the only way to get the relic of eternal indestructibility would be to sneak in through her bedchamber. Therefore, he looked down shyly, lowered his voice and said, Big sis Song, you're peerless and sublime. I don't know why, but I just can't stop myself from staring. With that, he stared at her a bit more. The way he treated her differently was exactly what Song Junwan found so amusing. Their flirtatious exchange caused all of the Foundation establishment cultivators to grumble bitterly inside. In addition to the hatred they felt for Bai Xiaochun, there was also a bit of envy. That was especially true of Master God Diviner, whose eyes widened into a near glare. Panting, he suddenly wished he could switch places with Bai Xiaochun. He wanted to be the one standing in front of Song Junwan, the Middle Peak Grand Elder who was in fact a rare beauty. He wanted to be the one flirting back and forth with her. Shui Mei looked at the two of them, and the coldness in her eyes grew more intense. Snorting coldly, she said, I'm also curious about something. What foul wind was it that brought Song Junwan over here? Get out of my way. With that, she waved her hand, and the blood-colored plum blossom suddenly began to move again. Song Junwan's smile suddenly turned icy. Du Shui Mei, this is Middle Peak. Don't let your presumptuousness get the better of you. 1. At this point you can now see why it's Shui Mei and not Shui Mei, because Shui Mei is her given name, with her surname being Du. Since I'm sure people will ask, yes, it's the same Du character as Du Lingfei. Don't forget that a shared surname doesn't necessarily confirm a relation or connection. For example, Xu Zhaoshan and Xu Baosai share the same surname, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're from the same family. She waved her right hand, and the spell formation that covered the area suddenly flared to life. Earlier, Shui Mei had just barely forced some of it to work, but now, the entire thing was in motion. The blood-colored plum blossom shattered, transforming into massive amounts of blood qi. Most of it scattered, although some of it was absorbed back by Shui Mei. Shui Mei stuck her chin up and arrogantly said, I'm in the middle of something here, why don't you mind your own business? The expression on her face when she looked at Song Junwan was different than when she looked at others, it was one of derision, and even intentional provocation. This is my business. I dare you to do something to Nightcrypt. Try it, and see what happens. Laughing coldly, Song Junwan's right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, and she waved her finger toward the ground. Instantly, the spell formation expanded, and in the blink of an eye, all of the lower finger was lit up. Song Junwan's eyes shone with just as much derision and provocation as Shui Mei's. Moved, Bai Xiaochun remained behind Song Junwan, glaring hatefully at Shui Mei. Shui Mei took a step forward, and her cultivation base erupted with power, becoming a tornado of 9 vortexes that stretched high up into the sky. This was the awe-inspiring power of Earthstring Foundation establishment and 9 tide flows. I'd originally planned to simply sever his hands to teach him a lesson. But since you're protecting him now, I think I'll end his life. Bai Xiaochun's eyes flickered, and inwardly, he despised Shui Mei even more. If he could reveal his Heaven Dao Foundation establishment, then the snap of his finger would leave her shocked into a daze. Other people might fear your status, but not Song Junwan. I couldn't care less. If you harm a single hair on Nightcrypt's head, I'll cut off one of your fingers. Song Junwan also took a step forward and unleashed the power of her cultivation base. Although she didn't have the vortexes of 9 tide flows, she was in the great circle of late Foundation establishment. The quality of the power at her disposal couldn't match up to Shui Mei's, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. Cracking sounds emanated out as the power from the two slammed into each other. Plants and trees in the area were shredded to pieces, and as the shockwave spread out, the Foundation establishment cultivators' hearts trembled. Shui Mei was clearly not a match, and after their initial clash, she staggered backward. Bai Xiaochun was so shaken that he didn't know what to do or say. He almost couldn't believe that the beautiful Grand Elder was treating him so well. For him, she had offended Shui Mei and even put herself on the line. Although Bai Xiaochun was of the opinion that one of his hairs was worth a lot more than a finger, he was still very moved by the Grand Elder's goodwill. She's really treating me too well, he thought. What am I supposed to do? Feeling a headache coming on, he hovered behind Song Junwan and stared somberly at Shui Mei. Shui Mei gave a cold harumph. Eyes burning with fury and killing intent, she waved her right index finger, causing a white beam of light to shoot out from her bag of holding. It transformed into a little white bell which had a smiling face engraved on its surface. Upon closer examination, however, the face almost seemed to be crying. If you started at it for too long, your scalp would begin to tingle, and your heart would fill with fear. As soon as the bell appeared, a bizarre aura spread out in all directions. As it merged into the 9 tide flow vortexes, the tide flow power erupted, and massive rumbling sounds filled the area. Strangely, the power from the bell seemed to be combining with the 9 tide flow vortexes. Instantly, the energy in the area skyrocketed, and the bell began to grow larger until it was fully 30 meters tall. As it hovered there in midair, it radiated boundless might and pressure. Shui Mei's eyes flickered. Thanks to the assistance of this magical item, her cultivation base power was rising until it was on the same level as Song Junwan's. Apparently, the ringing sound of the bell could influence the emotions of those who heard it. The faces of the onlookers flickered, and even Song Junwan's pupils constricted. This was clearly not a magical item designed for Foundation establishment cultivators. Considering Shui Mei's status, it was obvious to everyone that this was a precious treasure which had been gifted to her by her father Patriarch Limitless. It was only possible to imagine how powerful of a precious treasure a patriarch would give to his beloved daughter. Song Junwan gritted her teeth. She had never gotten along with Shui Mei, and both of them were currently engaged in a broader struggle for power. Although their mutual dislike had festered for years, Song Junwan currently had a far more powerful cultivation base than Shui Mei. And yet, a precious treasure provided by Patriarch Limitless was enough to fill her heart with fear. However, Shui Mei's heart also trembled in fear. She might have her precious treasure, but in terms of cultivation base, she wasn't a match for Song Junwan. Furthermore, when it came to official status in the sect, she couldn't really compete. The two of them stared at each other, both of them scared, and neither one willing to make the first move. Bai Xiaochun remained off to the side, shocked, staring in amazement at the precious magical item. The two women stared at each other for a while before Song Junwan finally chuckled coldly. Smiling a beautiful smile, she spoke words that cut as deeply as a razor-sharp blade. You wear a mask all day, and a mask carved with a plum flower at that. You might as well carve your own ass on that mask, Shui Mei. You're obviously so ugly you don't dare to show your face in public. Everyone in the area gasped. It was almost as if they were listening to a stranger, and not the Grand Elder. Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped, and he looked over at Shui Mei, wondering how she would counterattack. Shui Mei snorted coldly. Completely ignoring Bai Xiaochun, she glared at Song Junwan and said, "Oh yeah? Well, your good looks are probably why you're so easy. The only way you got to be Grand Elder of Middle Peak was by losing your virtue in 10,000 affairs. Everybody in the sect knows it. I wouldn't be surprised if you'd sleep with 100,000 people to become a Bloodmaster. Wouldn't you?" Countless gasps echoed out, and the cultivators of Middle Peak stared with wide eyes. As of this moment, Shui Mei also seemed like a complete stranger. Shui Mei's counterattack struck Bai Xiaochun mute. Gasping, he couldn't decide which one of them was superior. They actually seemed to be evenly matched. However, something seemed odd about the situation, and suddenly, he wondered if he had felt moved for no reason. By now, the two shrews seemed to be completely ignoring him, and were consumed by hatred for each other. Hey, hold on, he thought. I'm supposed to be the center of attention. Did they forget about me? Blinking, he decided to remind them of what was going on. Listen, ladies. However, before he could finish, both Shui Mei and Song Junwan snapped, shut up. Bai Xiaochun was initially frightened, but then enraged. However, before he could say anything else, Song Junwan laughed coldly. Shut your ass up, Du Shui Mei. I'm not the easy one. The easy one was your mother. She had to do a blood test just to figure out that Patriarch Limitless was your father. That's the truth, and everybody knows it. Other people might not dare to say it out loud, but go ask any of your father's friends. They all know. Song Junwan laughed coldly. This time, there were no gasps. Everyone was completely dumbstruck. Considering that a patriarch had just been mentioned, they felt almost like they had been struck by thunder. There were even some who started to slowly edge away. Obviously, in a brutal organization like the Bloodstream sect, a secret the likes of which had just been mentioned was the kind that people got killed for hearing. Song Junwan might not be afraid, but that was because one of the Bloodstream sect patriarchs was from her clan. Nobody else present had such a background. Not willing to be outdone, Shui Mei spat, slanderer. You think I don't know the truth about you? Song K is your love child. And Night Crypt is your secret lover. If that weren't the case, you never would have showed up so quickly. You probably stepped out the back door and then just hurried back, didn't you? You disgusting slut bucket. This second batch of unverifiable news caused the scalps of all onlookers to tingle in fear. Moments ago, people had been edging away quietly, but at this point, they didn't dare to hear anything more. Hearts pounding, they fled, convinced that if they listened any further, they would end up dead. Bai Xiaochun was also trembling in terror, and was wondering if he would also be silenced in death to keep the news from spreading. He began to carefully sneak away, hoping to put as much distance between himself and these two women as possible. The truth was that, in this moment, he was just as scared as he had been back in the Luokan Mountains. Even as he prepared to flee at top speed, Song Junwan and Shui Mei continued to curse each other, revealing even more explosive bits of information. Bai Xiaochun's skin crawled as he heard all sorts of sordid history regarding the Bloodstream sect. By this point, the Bloodstream sect patriarchs were aware of what was happening. Eventually, it seemed they weren't interested in hearing any more, and one of the patriarchs cleared his throat. The sound transformed into rumbling thunder, and a lightning bolt even split the sky overhead. Song Junwan and Shui Mei knew what that meant. Neither of them wanted to back down, but they had no choice. With a final vicious glare at each other, they snorted coldly and parted ways. One flew up to the upper finger, the other left middle peak. Unexpectedly, neither of them spared a second glance for Bai Xiaochun. Soon, everything was quiet. Bai Xiaochun hovered there in shock for a moment before looking around and sighed. There were few things in life as terrifying as two women who hated each other. Bai Xiaochun sighed and looked down at his immortals cave, pondering his miserable existence. Since arriving in the Bloodstream sect, he'd had 2 immortals caves destroyed. These people are savages. One slip of the tongue and they destroy your immortals cave. Shaking his head, he looked over furiously at the blood trees. The blood trees had been completely useless, they'd been so scared that they didn't even offer a warning. Now that he was glaring at them, they were shivering and attempting to look as ingratiating as possible. Bai Xiaochun was not in a good mood. After glaring at the trees well and good, he warned them that if something like this happened again, he would tear them up by the roots once and for all. After the trembling trees promised that they would behave better in the future, Bai Xiaochun finally let them off the hook. It took the rest of the night to clean up the mess that was the remains of his immortals cave. Around dawn, he used spiritual power to repair some of the damage, and then used the rest of the day to recover. As he sat there cross-legged in the immortals cave, he thought about the situation, and came to the conclusion that Shui Mei probably wouldn't come back for him anytime soon. As long as he stayed on the mountain, he shouldn't have any trouble. Just wait until I get that relic of eternal indestructibility, he said, snorting coldly. Then I'll show that hussy Shui Mei how awesome I really am. Then he thought about all the secrets he'd heard, and was suddenly worried again. It should be fine, right? He thought, trying to comfort himself. However, 3 days later, he happened to hear that a random disciple had been summoned by the Grand Elder, and had been punished severely for no apparent reason. Bai Xiaochun immediately started to get more nervous. From what he remembered, that disciple had been one of the group who heard all of the secrets. Another day went by, and Bai Xiaochun heard about a disciple who had somehow provoked Shui Mei. Apparently, she had punished him by tossing him into blood prison. Bai Xiaochun began to pant in shock. I'm finished. Kaput. The shrews are starting to tie up all the loose ends. Bai Xiaochun anxiously tried to get more information about what was happening. During that time, he heard plenty of rumors about cultivators being imprisoned by Shui Mei or dispatched by the Grand Elder to the Profound Stream Sect or Pill Stream Sect on spy missions. Most unbelievable was a tale about one of the cultivators who was summoned to the upper finger for an audience with the Grand Elder, and then was suddenly killed. That cultivator must have been a complete idiot, Bai Xiaochun thought. After hearing everything that was happening with the cultivators who had heard the secrets, Bai Xiaochun trembled with fear. He even thought about simply fleeing, but couldn't bring himself to do so. It wasn't my fault that I heard that stuff. He didn't want to hear the secrets of Shui Mei's past, or know how many people Song Junwan had been in relationships with. After a few more days passed, no more stories popped up about people being punished, and Bai Xiaochun started to relax. The next day, as he was in the middle of cultivating the undying live forever technique, his expression flickered, and he suddenly turned his head. Outside of his immortal's cave, a cold voice suddenly rang out, "Night Crypt, the Grand Elder has requested your presence." As soon as Bai Xiaochun heard that, his heart seized. Trembling in fear, he opened the door a crack to look at the person outside. Beyond the trembling blood trees stood an old man wearing a blood-colored robe decorated with complex golden designs. He had his hands clasped behind his back, and from the fluctuations of his cultivation base, he was in the late foundation establishment stage. When Bai Xiaochun saw the blood-colored robe and the golden designs, he knew exactly who this person was. He occupied a position second only to the Grand Elder, and definitely much higher than Dharma protectors or regular elders. He was a Bloodstreak Elder. A Bloodstreak Elder. See, could he be here to silence me? Usually there were 10 or so Bloodstreak Elders on every mountain, and they cooperated with the Grand Elder to maintain order. Bai Xiaochun looked like he was about to cry. His mind replayed all of the stories he'd heard about the cultivators who had been punished over the past weeks, and he got so nervous that his face went pale. What do I do? What do I do? The Bloodstreak Elder was starting to get impatient, and called out, "Night Crypt, what's with the dilly-dallying? I'll give you 3 breaths of time to get out here." Grimacing, Bai Xiaochun hesitated for a moment, but finally realized there was nothing he could do. Gritting his teeth, he walked out of the Immortal's cave. The Bloodstreak Elder glared at him, clearly displeased with Bai Xiaochun's slowness. With a cold snort, he led the way toward the upper finger. Bai Xiaochun followed along, mind racing with plans for how to deal with the situation. His nervousness only continued to mount as he followed the Bloodstreak Elder to Song Junwan's Immortal's cave. The grounds were expansive, and covered with blood-red roses that filled the air with a fragrant aroma. 9 blood waterfalls could be seen in the area, which poured into a blood lake. A stone path led across the lake to the area behind the waterfalls, where a mysterious Immortal's cave was located. Only after passing through the waterfalls would one be able to actually see the door of the Immortal's cave, which was pitch black. 4 young attendants stood there silently on guard. Within the waters of the blood lake, it was possible to see strange fish swimming about. When they occasionally leapt out of the water, vicious teeth and spined fins could be seen before they splashed down out of sight. "Go in, the Grand Elder is waiting for you," the Bloodstreak Elder said coolly. Then he sat down cross-legged off to the side. Bai Xiaochun looked around nervously. Of course, it wasn't lost on him that this location was his ultimate goal in the Bloodstream sect. The relic of eternal indestructibility was located beneath this very Immortal's cave. Sighing, he walked carefully along the path, his heart pounding in his chest. Eventually, he passed through the waterfalls, and was in front of the door. The 4 young attendants looked at him coldly, but didn't say anything. Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth, and tried to convince himself that the patriarchs knew who he was, so if Song Junwan wanted to make a move against him, they would surely intervene. After all, he had already accomplished an inverse blood ancestral awakening. Clearing his throat, he clasped hands and bowed. "Night Crypt is here to offer greetings, Big Sis Song." Song Junwan's voice drifted out from the Immortal's cave in response. "Come in." Her voice sounded as lovely as ever to Bai Xiaochun, but there also seemed something vaguely sinister about it. Having no other choice, he braced himself, pushed open the door, and entered. A delicate fragrance met him as he stepped into the luxuriously decorated Immortal's cave. Glowing pearls were inlaid in the ceiling, while the floor was green and scintillated like a gem. There was strong blood qi, as well as abundant spiritual energy, so much so that it made everything a bit hazy. It was impossible to say how many side rooms there were, but the grand hall in the middle had a hot spring, from which steam rose up into the air. Floating there in the water was a woman, her body just barely visible underneath the surface. She almost looked like a mermaid as she swayed back and forth, her curves so prominent that Bai Xiaochun's tongue immediately stuck to the roof of his mouth. Vixen, he thought, don't even think of making a pass at Bai Xiaochun. You can't fool me. This is obviously a trap. If I stare at you, you'll accuse me of offending you. Gritting his teeth, he forced his gaze down, refusing to look at her. Come on in, Song Junwan said. Bai Xiaochun walked forward, head bowed, until he was at the edge of the water. At that point, it became impossible to look down, so instead, he looked up to study the glowing pearls overhead. Expression somber, he could just barely see her body out of the corner of his eyes. Heart trembling, he yet again cursed the vixen. Song Junwan could see what he was doing, and chuckled flirtatiously. Then, the sound of rippling water could be heard as she swam to the edge of the hot spring and stepped out. Draping a blood-red bathrobe over herself, she walked over to Bai Xiaochun, then reached out with her jade-like finger and tugged his chin down. What's wrong, little bro night crypt? No lewd stare for me today? Her breath smelled like an orchid, and considering how close she was, it was impossible for him not to see her milky white skin. It was a very enticing scene, something almost impossible to describe with words. Anyone who laid eyes on her in this situation would surely be struck mute. Her eyes sparkled like spring rain, and were both profoundly deep and endlessly charming. It almost seemed like looking into them would leave a man eternally lost within their depths, unable to think, unable to free himself. Song Junwan slowly leaned over and blew gently into Bai Xiaochun's ear, and her hot breath made him shiver all the way down to his bones and even his soul. He almost couldn't take it. He shivered under the intense stimulation, and even started to pant. By this point his eyes were completely bloodshot. Song Junwan appeared to be smiling, and yet, there was something disdainful and cold in her eyes. Just when she seemed to be on the verge of saying something else, Bai Xiaochun took a few steps back. Instead of looking up at the ceiling, he stared directly into her eyes. His own eyes were bloodshot, his face distorted almost as if with pain. Grand Elder, he said, almost growling, please behave yourself. A look of disappointment appeared in his eyes, something like bitter heartbreak. He almost seemed like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Song Junwan, who had been on the verge of speaking, suddenly stared back at him in shock, and the coldness in her eyes vanished. Grand Elder, in my heart, you are holy, like the moon in the sky, eternally sacred, so beautiful that even someone who spotted you from afar would be envious. He looked hurt, and although his words were spoken softly, they filled the whole Immortals cave. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.